Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Minister for making that very interesting point about the extra discipline that will be brought to bear on smaller councils who seek to borrow funds through the new agency. I mean, one of the reasons I think this bill is so worthy of support is that it's another way that small councils, particularly rural and provincial councils, who have been really struggling with the demands of investing in their local infrastructure, it's another way, by tapping into the collective, that they've got the kind of critical mass and the ability to make those investments. And it's not unlike the approach to shared services that some councils have been doing successfully. And it gives those smaller councils a pathway that avoids some of the difficulties associated with amalgamation, because there's no doubt that a lot of those smaller rural councils are facing considerable pressure to amalgamate. And as we know, we've debated many times in this House that big is not always better, and that there are real downsides in terms of representation, in terms of local voice and governance, when particularly kind of smaller and dispersed communities are forced into bigger governance units. And that's one of the big dilemmas in the local government sector today. And this bill actually offers those councils a kind of one way out of that dilemma. I really appreciated the discussion earlier, Stuart Nash and Ian Lees-Galloway and the Minister, around Clause 7 in Part 1 and the implications of Part 5D of the Reserve Bank Act not applying to the funding agency, and appreciated the Minister's explanation of that. I suppose that the underlying principle of this bill is that it's appropriate to treat the local government funding agency as if it were a local authority, and that's the basis on which it is exempted from Part 5D. When Part 5D was put into the Reserve Bank originally, local authorities were exempted from it, and Clause 7 is simply making this bill consistent with that principle. But I think it's worth noting the reasons why it's logical to treat the funding agency as if it were a local authority. There's a number of reasons, and Local Government New Zealand summarised them quite nicely in their submission to the Select Committee. The agency's function is to borrow money and lend that to local authorities. It's therefore merely a vehicle for local authorities to borrow collectively. The credit risk faced by lenders is of a similar nature to the credit risk that's faced by lenders to local authorities, because the agency's debtors will be local authorities themselves. The money that's being borrowed is going to be applied to exactly the same purposes as money borrowed directly by local authorities. And to the extent that any funds are passed on to any entity that's not a local authority, i.e. in the form of dividends, that entity will be the Crown, because the Crown's the only shareholder of the agency that's not a local authority. And the Crown, of course, is also exempt from Part 5D of the Reserve Bank Act. The other related issue is this question of Clause 9, which exempts the agency from prohibitions and restrictions that apply to council-controlled trading organisations. And what we heard at Select Committee was that it's arguable that the funding agency will fall within the definition of a council-controlled trading organisation under the Local Government Act, 2002 Act. Now, if it does, there are a couple of consequences. One is that Section 62 of the Local Government Act will apply to it, and that prohibits local authorities from guaranteeing the agency's debt, and Section 63 of the Local Government Act, which may prevent local authorities from lending subordinated debt to the funding agency. So what Clause 9 does is it eliminates the risk that either of those sections, Mr Chair.
Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just to respond to Mr Twyford's comments, I think he's right. Just in the border aspect, this is an example, if you like, of Parliament helping with the shared service. And I think that when you look ahead, if you are going to amalgamate or change jurisdiction, you want to do it for governance reasons, not for cost reasons. And I think that there is a bit of pressure coming on councils as we pile more functions on, times get tougher. And people say, well, let's amalgamate, but you're actually trying to amalgamate to save money rather than because of a reason for good governance. And the more that I've been involved in the sector, the more it's become apparent to me that there's huge opportunities for shared services, dramatically reducing the costs for individual councils and indeed for improving their performance, because you can have, a whole series of little councils trying to maintain really a very sophisticated operation, each on their own. And even if they have the money, actually trying oftentimes to attract the necessary personnel is quite tough. And there's certainly a greater enthusiasm in local government New Zealand and within councils to start talking about shared services. And I think we need to be thinking about, as a parliament and as future governments, thinking about, well, what is the role and what are the barriers in order to facilitate those opportunities where councils agree that it's a smart thing to do. And I think hopefully that'll be part of the review that we've set up with Smarter Government, Stronger Communities, can actually look at that, because there is definitely a huge potential, of which this bill is a part.
Sue Moroney.